Welcome to our devotional series on Be Thou an Example. Today we're looking at 1 Peter 2, verses 21 through 25. This will be the last in our series coming from this text. We still have one more text we'll be looking at over the next week or so. But for today, this will be the last lesson coming from 1 Peter 2, 21 through 25. If you remember in this text, we're looking at the need to follow Christ's example for us. And one of the things I wanted to remind us about in verse number 25 is this. Let's read verse 25. For you were like sheep going astray, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Let me tell you something, folks. As we come to an end to this text, as we've been looking throughout this text at the life of Christ and the many different ways he set the example for us to follow, and in doing so then we can be an example to others. But I wanted us to notice throughout this text, not just in verse 25, but throughout the text, I would like us to notice a very important principle that many times we have a tendency to forget. Many times, folks, we kind of feel like following Christ is something that's a good idea to do. It's nothing that has to be done. It's just a good idea to do it. It's kind of like someone saying, well, I can get through life on my own, but it helps to have Christ with me. Some people have I've heard make the statement, Christ is my co-pilot. I think I've seen that on bumper stickers. Folks, let me tell you something. We can't get through our life without Christ. We can't do it. Without Christ, we will be automatically shipwrecked. And Christ is not our co-pilot. He should be our pilot. In other words, following Christ's example is not simply a good habit and a good principle for us. Following the example of Christ is absolutely necessary for us to be successful in our walk on this earth. That's the point I'm trying to get to. In all of these verses, we've seen how Christ has set the perfect example in many aspects of his life. Let me tell you something, folks. If we want to be successful Christians who are setting the proper example for others about us, we have to follow the example Christ has set. It's of extreme importance. If there's some way I could capitalize this part of our lesson, the part that comes from 1 Peter 2, 21 through 25, somebody could capitalize it or put stars around it or underline it or put it in bold print or however you want to put it, just to emphasize this is perhaps the most important part of what we've been studying so far. We've looked at many different aspects of our need to set the example for others, both in detail and just the general principles of setting the example for others. I'll tell you, I think this text is probably the most important in the entire series. Because in this text we can see the absolute necessity of following Christ's example if we're going to be the proper example for others. We cannot do it of our own power. We cannot do it of our own wisdom. We cannot do it of our own abilities. We cannot do it of our own efforts. We cannot set the proper example apart from following the example of Christ. That's where it's all at. So, folks, I ask you, as we take a break now this weekend, before we come back next Monday for our next devotional series, I would ask you, take some extra time to look at these verses this weekend and really allow the Lord to open up the Word to you and show you the need to be constantly seeking to follow His example. Folks, before we make decisions in life, we should be asking, what would the Lord do in this situation? We should be constantly searching the Scriptures to find what the Lord would have us to do in the different situations in life. We should be looking especially in the Gospels as the Lord lived His life on earth, as we see Him dealing with different issues that came His way. We should be taking mental notes. This is how the Lord dealt with that. If this ever comes my way, I need to deal with it in the same way. Because to fail in following Christ's example is to fail in setting the example for others to follow. Period. There is no exception to that. So, folks, to close out this text, this part of our series, I ask you once again, please understand the seriousness and the absolute need for us to follow Christ's example. And in doing so, we will be setting the proper example for those around us.